As many of you know, I am a follower of Jesus Christ, and I believe in what the Christian Bible has to say. And one of the things that has always stood out to me that listed in the Proverbs about, the way that you should live life, the things you should do, the things that you should avoid, always some great advice in there. One of the key ones that has really always stood out to me, because I've seen it demonstrated in life so often, is that pride comes before the fall. And if we needed any more examples of that than the many that we already have, in my view, it was today in Foreign Affairs magazine, published by an article by Mitch McConnell, Senator Mitch McConnell, as you see there on the screen, titled "The Price of American Retreat." And I felt it really important to address this issue today. And not just because of him in particular, he's one of many, but because of this pernicious and, I believe, dangerous foreign policy view that works very much against the United States. He's trying to say there, and McConnell has been long known as being antagonistic with Trump, even though they're in the same party, and they seem to always be, at cross purposes with one another. But McConnell's coming in and saying, hey, we're not going to have any of this retreat. We're not going to have any isolationism going on here. But here's what's important to understand and why we're doing this video today. There is nobody is talking about isolationism. You need to understand what they mean when they say this. What I'm trying to explain to you is that these people, whether intentional or not, McConnell is lying. You could say he's stupid, but I won't say that, because he's not stupid. He's actually very bright, very intelligent. He wouldn't have been in the position he was and has remained in power for as long as he has at that position if he was. He's not. He's very smart. But he is being absolutely intentionally deceptive to you. By saying this word isolation, they know for sure, he and everybody who utters this in Washington knows that automatically creates 1938 vibes. Everybody always knows about, because it's talked about forever in the American side, that the Munich Agreement in 1938, where the British Prime Minister handed over Czechoslovakia to Hitler, just feeding the war frenzy, which turned into be a global war. His appeasement of Adolf Hitler at the time was basically, it wasn't the cause, but it was certainly the trigger that allowed World War II to go. That's been the claim forever. And so anytime anybody talks about something besides military power or threats, these people who advocate that, instead of arguing on the merits, they don't do that, because then they would lose, because most Americans would say, yeah, that's stupid. That doesn't make any sense at all, and we're not going to do that. Instead, they hide behind 1938, and everybody is always Hitler. And anything besides full-throated movement into the global affairs and military means is isolationists, and is people who are going to be capitulating to any particular enemy. That's the only way these people view the world. And I want to explain to you, first of all, that they're lying, and second of all, what the consequences and the cost are of listening to them. See, because while they want to run back to 1938 for everything, what they don't want to run back to is their track record, which has been hell on earth and an absolute unmitigated strategic disaster of incredible proportions, which has cost America trillions of dollars. And that was right, I used a T, trillions of dollars, thousands of lives of our service members, and hundreds of thousands suffering from traumatic brain injuries and post-traumatic stress disorder. That is the wreckage of following this kind of mentality. And unfortunately, that rarely gets discussed. So instead of just taking it at face value, and of course, Foreign Affairs magazine is the premier publication for foreign policy. So this obviously is going to get a lot of traction, which is why we're going to talk about it today. Now, let's look first of all at one of his premise and what Senator McConnell is talking about here. He's going to lay out here what he lists is the reason right off the top. He said, China has intensified its efforts to expand its military, political, and economic influence worldwide. Russia is fighting a brutal and unjustified war in Ukraine. Iran remains undeterred in its campaign to destroy Israel, dominate the Middle East, and develop a nuclear weapons capability. And these three U.S. adversaries, along with North Korea, are working together more closely than ever to undermine U.S.-led order that has underpinned Western peace and prosperity for nearly a century. So, holy cow, lions and tigers and bears, oh my, they're everywhere. All these enemies of America. What you see in this and scattered throughout this article is this absolutely unsubstantiated and absurd at face value claim that for no good reason, all these countries are doing all this awful stuff. And everything is characterized from our perspective that all of these horrible people are doing terrible things in the world. And all we're trying to do is keep the international rules-based order in place that we've had since the end of World War II. We're just trying to be good people, folks. We're just trying to be the good cop on the street to keep everybody safe. As long as everybody would do what we tell them to do and follow our rules, everything would be just peachy. That's a lie. That's another lie. So let's take a look at those. China. China has been a rising power, and we don't like that. We don't want China having an influence in the Asia Pacific, in the Indo-Pacific area. That's our neighborhood. Well, actually, everything we consider our neighborhood. But we have been very antagonistic to the Chinese. We have continued to run these what's so-called freedom of navigation operations, military weapons, warships right into the Taiwan Straits, into the South China Sea, right up to the shorelines of China. We continue to run reconnaissance aircraft right up to their border, right up near their airspace, and to spy on them. We do it all the time. It's been known for quite a long time. We continue to foster independence issues in Taiwan. We keep sending higher and higher level delegations of people in there. And all of these things have a predictable result. China has been building up its military power. It's been creating what's called an A2AD, area defense, area denial capacity to defeat should the United States come in. Because according to China, their view is, and it doesn't matter whether you agree with this or not, their position is that Taiwan is a part of their country and still left over from the 1949 Civil War in China. It's never been resolved all the way through. Not many in America are even aware of that or care, because as far as they know, Taiwan's just this independent country that's and it doesn't matter what China says. That's fair too. That's your view. There's no problem with that. Now, between Taiwan and China, they do have some issues there. We have decided to make that our issue. And at least on several occasions, I think at least 3 occasions during the Biden administration, when asked, would you fight China over Taiwan? He said, yes. We would defend China. We would fight for Taiwan against China. Now, it had been America's foreign policy position forever that there was strategic ambiguity. We're not going to say whether we would or whether we wouldn't. We recognize China and we quit recognizing Taiwan. And I think it was 1972 because we recognized that there was the strategic benefit to do so. But we still had the Taiwan Relations Act where we would help them defend themselves and provide arms and they could buy, et cetera. That stood for quite a long time until now China's starting to rise in power. And so we're trying to, and this is Republican, Democrat, it doesn't matter. It's America. We continue to push that issue. Trump, when he came into power, put a lot of economic pressure on there because China was legitimately cheating against the United States. They were still in intellectual property. They were trying to seek an unfair advantages, et cetera. There were mechanisms to fix a lot of that stuff, to address it, and we had been very successful in the WPO, I think it was. So there's a lot of forums we could have done, but we decided we didn't want to do that. We wanted to use military force to compel compliance to our side. And then that had the predictable result that China then started building up its military power to now then, especially with its A2AD capacities and its industrial capacity, its missile capacity, its air defense capacity, its naval strength that's now much bigger than ours, especially in that region. And in their front yard, in the Taiwan area, the South China Sea, China is now much stronger than the force that we could bring to bear there, basically from 6,000 miles away from the U.S. to try to support anything. So the power has decisively shifted in China's favor because, in large part, because of our policies. But now then for McConnell to just claim that literally out of nowhere, all of a sudden China is doing these nefarious things is a lie. because he doesn't want to tell you that this is the natural result that anyone would have if a foreign power started moving into your neighborhood and trying to get somebody to rebel against your rule that you think should be in it on your border, 100 miles across the sea. It's basically from the same as from Florida to Cuba in essence. We've seen what we would do if Russia ever came into that area, 1962 Cuban Missile Crisis, to wit. And if anybody from either Russia or China today tried to do anything at all on America's border, I assure you we would react much harsher than what China has so far. Now, if you want to make the argument that that's what we should do and that somehow benefits, fine, make your argument. But do not lie and say that, no, there's no reason for them to do this, because there is. We would do the same thing. One of the other things that he said on that he talked about was the Russia-Ukraine war. And what did he say? He's the previous one, Gary, if you could bring that previous one back up. He said, Russia is fighting a brutal and unjustified war in Ukraine. Okay, from our perspective, that's the case. I assure you, from Russia's perspective, that's not the case. And it matters what the other side's perspective is. It doesn't matter what you think. See, we think that this international rules-based order that's existed from World War II means that we get to call all the shots, tell everyone how they can react to things. But it's not. It doesn't matter what you think or what you want. It matters what is. People have within the limits of their power, within the capacities that they have a role to play, and they have a vote to make. And so we can want this, but if we're trying to make another country react differently than we would, and this is another case with that, from 2008 forward, when the NATO declared that they were going to have NATO in Ukraine and in Georgia, Russia took limited military engagements in Georgia that same year to prevent that from happening. They said all the way through, that's a red line. NATO and Ukraine is a red line, more than just the Baltics even, which is also on Russia's border, but in a different place where it's militarily more easily to defend themselves. Ukraine, it's almost like an arrow pointing to Moscow, this big open path that has already twice in the last 2 centuries been used as an invasion route from the West into Russia. So it's an existential issue to them. They made that very clear, and we ignored it. We didn't care. We said, nope, we're going to do it anyway. And then we want to act surprised. So when you say, when McConnell writes, it's unjustified and it was illegal, et cetera, only because you don't want it to be justified. But from the Russian perspective, as it was, meaning, here's the key thing. If you take action that an adversary has unequivocally told you is a red line for us, and we will take action if you do this, and then we do it anyway, you can't be surprised by what happens. And you can't claim that there's no reason for this, because there is a reason for it. And you know there's a reason for it. You know that they're going to react this way. Now, if you don't want them to react that way, then don't take this action here. The truth is that what happened between Russia and Ukraine did not have anything to do with our national security, did not have anything to do with European security. Never did. We made it have an issue with that. If we had just let them play out however it plays out, then actually, if we did that, first of all, there wouldn't have been any, there almost certainly would not have been a war between Russia and Ukraine, because we would not have promised them NATO enlargement or NATO advancement. Then they would have known that they just have to make a deal with their bigger neighbor. They could have declared independence. It could have been the Austrian model, or like Finland, that peacefully lived alongside Russia and had total freedom to do anything they wanted, just not to join a military bloc. All those things were possible. The Minsk agreements, they could have followed that. Any number of things it could have done. All we had to do is just leave it alone and just continued on with our prosperity. If that had happened, of course, Ukraine would be whole today. Tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, most likely, Ukrainians would still be alive, and Europe would still be enjoying cheap gas from just for its economy. So Europe would be benefiting, Ukraine would certainly be benefiting, and we would be benefiting, because then we would not have had tens of thousands of our military equipment, pieces of equipment, tanks, artillery pieces, rocket launchers, air defense, etc. All that would still be in our inventory. All these weapons and ammunition and missiles and interceptor missiles would still be in our inventory. Our national security would still be up here instead of down here where it is right now. So that's another of the cost to listen to this kind of nonsense that you're hearing out of Senator McConnell right now and all those who speak like him. And of course, I could go down the list. Everything on there, on that first part there, was exactly what I'm talking about. The same thing with Iran. We've been taking all kinds of provocative actions against Iran and all kinds of coercive actions and sanctions. And we've been helping Israel with military means against them. What do you think they're going to do, folks? Do you think they're going to sit there? But see, McConnell talks about none of that. He says none of it. He says basically every bit of it is just out of control, and only weakness on our part is causing it. As though that we're just sitting there just enjoying our Sunday afternoon, maybe watching a football game, and now all of a sudden look around, all these guys are rising up because they want to come get us. They recognize that we're weak. Have you ever stopped to think about that? Just how absurd that is on the base of it, that American weakness is spawning this? What weakness are you talking about? We're the most militarized country on the planet in the history of the world. No one has been more militarized than we were. Maybe the Roman Empire was similar back in its day, but nothing in the modern history has ever been as powerful as we are, and especially when you talk about nuclear weapons, no one is. But how many times have we used military power? There's scores of times, folks, way more than anybody else on the planet, way more than, I think China and Russia together, it's just a minuscule amount of international military power that they've used. We use it all over the place. So what do you think is going to happen, folks? Do you think that people are going to continue to let you do whatever you want militarily to their disadvantage and never do anything? I mean, come on, it's stupid. It's catastrophically harmful for many people. It already has been. But it's going to harm our interest even more if we don't wise up from this. Now, that's what he still lays out is the problem. What does he lay out as the solution? Gary, if you can go to that next call out there. He says Trump would be wise to build his foreign policy on the enduring cornerstone of U.S. leadership, hard power. To reverse the neglect of the military strength, and his administration must commit to a significant and sustained increase in defense spending. Okay, there it is. It's cash, man. It's all about cash. Generational investments in the defense industrial base and urgent reforms to speed the United States development of new capabilities and expand allies and partners' access to them. That now you see it's exposed right there. It's about the cash. And let me tell you what that cash number is. Right now, and he points this out in the article, doesn't even hide behind it. He said we have right now about a $900 billion defense industry, which is 12.8%. 12.8% of all federal spending. Think about that for a second. What is it, like 4-point-something trillion dollars? We have 12.8% of the federal budget is spent on defense. And this is a quote from the article too, this is not near enough. Not near enough? It's already way more than what is like the next 10 countries combined, way, way, way more than both China and Russia put together. Even if you add all the external and extraneous stuff, all the different categories, apples to apples comparison, it's way more than both of them combined. And it's not near enough. And listen, what we have bought for that money is it's making, like Gary put up that picture there a second ago, all the defense contractors they're all fat cats. They love the $900 billion because the majority of it comes to those folks right there, other than the pay and allowances that go to our foreign forces. But in terms of what gets spent, it goes to these guys right here. So they love that. But you know who doesn't love it? I don't love it. You know why? Because it's created an army that has a handful of super expensive items like an F-35. One F-35 is like $200-something million, and then plus tons more to maintain and operate. Huge amounts on these weapons, but they don't do that much in modern warfare anymore. As you see, Russia uses their aircraft because of air defense. Even as weak as the Ukrainian air defense capacity is, it's still the Russians dare not intervene, in Ukrainian airspace because even they can get their stuff shot down. So they have to launch it from a distance. Well, it's not a whole lot different than drones and long-range missiles, et cetera. And that's clearly where things are going. And China has already figured this out. And so they have a lot of the development of those kinds of weapons and the production capacity of it. We don't. We spend so much time on a handful of expensive issues that we don't have enough to actually have a capable military. Consider also that Russia has somewhere around 700,000 troops inside Ukraine right now. 700,000. You know how big our army is in its entirety? Less than 500,000, 480, I think, something like that. I didn't see the most recent numbers, but that's our entire active duty force that's supposed to be globally deployed to make care of all these global things. And we have spent so much time on counterinsurgencies and ridiculous counterproductive issues like these stupid dots in Syria where we have to keep putting our troops, and all those folks that Gary keeps showing you that are in the Middle East that aren't doing anything for our national security. They're doing stuff for some of the folks in the Middle East, but nothing for us. It's just a net drain on our capacities because we don't need to. We don't need to. We're energy independent for the moment anyway, and we don't need that. But other nations do. So why would we have to defend that for the benefit of all these other countries? And who are we defending it against anyway? That's a separate issue. But the point being that we have all those troops there, and we spend all that money not warfighting. We are not preparing our troops to actually fight potentially existential battles that we may someday have to fight against a peer, the type of like China or Russia, or a near peer like North Korea, or even a big country like Iran. As backward technologically as they are in comparison, if we had to fight an actual full-on war against them, it would be very, very tough task for us to do. Now, I know you don't think it does. You think we just launched a few missiles, but that's not how war works. I mean, if you've paid any attention to Iraq and however many, 20-something years that would still on a slow scale continues. It was about 8 years before we even ended it the first time. You had 20 years of Afghanistan. This Russia-Ukraine war has been going on 3 years. You see what I'm saying? Wars, when they get fought, take a long time. We don't have that capacity here because we have foolishly spent all this money. And now then here you have McConnell saying we need to spend more. No, we don't. We don't need to spend more. What we need to do is bring our foreign policy in line with our ability to sustain a combat and make sure that the troops that we do have can actually defend our country in the event of attack. Defend. Not to have this force that can be used to go into all these different parts of the world, which it can't do, by the way. We don't have that kind of force capacity. So we're trying to do a little of everything with enough money that is not going to support that, and too few people. We already know about the issue we have with trying to recruit people, et cetera. Even that's one of the reasons we have such a low numbers right there, because people don't want to join that, because that's not defending your country, which is why I joined the military during the Cold War, because there was a very real opponent in the USSR on the other side there. And if things went sideways, our literal security could be threatened. And that motivated me. And I went and volunteered as a private when I first joined in 1985. That's a lot fewer today, because people look around and they think, what are you defending? You're not defending against anything. You're sending troops all over these places, in all these different countries, and you're helping these other people fight wars that we don't even think need to be fought. So they're getting sick of it all. So it's hard to do. But see, McConnell didn't want to talk about that either. He just wants more money, a lot more, to use his term. And let's look in the last part here about what this means. So in 1997, Bill Clinton swore in the new Secretary of State, Madeleine Albright. And during that inauguration time, he laid out a vision for America that still applies to this day.
America must continue to be the world's greatest force for peace and freedom and prosperity. Madeleine Albright has the strength and wisdom to help ensure that America remains the indispensable nation.
The indispensable nation. That was some of the genesis that we're still paying for to this day, because that sounds really cool. It kind of puffs up our ego. Yeah, we're the indispensable nation on the whole planet. We're more indispensable than anyone else. And Clinton was one of the early architects of that. George Bush, of course, did a lot of the stuff that he did, during his time, especially with Desert Storm or whatever, kept our troops there. He didn't take them out all the time. We had the Southern Watch and the Northern Watch and all that stuff, even after Desert Storm, where he withdrew the bulk of it, but kind of kept a lot of it there, and, the New World Order and all that kind of stuff. But Clinton really started looking for other business, so to speak, looking for other ways to go. actually a couple of years before this in, let's see, what year was it? I think it was 95. So maybe a couple of years before that, somewhere around there, when we were wanting to have the Dayton Accords, because there was a lot of stuff going on in the southern flank of Europe, in the Balkans with the Yugoslavia when it broke up after the end of the Cold War. Lots of fighting with the Serbs, the Croats, and the Bosnians, and all that. So all that was cooking up in there, and of course everybody's saying, "Well, that's where World War I started." So a new war could start if we don't get that taken care of. Now, we'll set aside for a minute that the geopolitical conditions in 1914 were radically different than they were in the 90s. But let's say, okay, there was something that was going on there, and it could potentially expand in there, and it was not good for there to be war anywhere on the continent. Then let the Europeans deal with that. It's Europe. That's what they're supposed to do to ensure their own security, especially those European countries that were on the flanks of Yugoslavia had a lot of motivation to do that. But Clinton did not want to do that. He basically begged the United States and the voters to let him do that. And he made this big famous speech once where he said, we have to do this, because if we don't do it, then the European nations won't follow our lead, and they will not then they'll stop taking care of it. And I'm like right there going, hey, hang on, then stop. Let's stop this insanity right then. Because if you're telling me that the Europeans won't step up to their defense needs on a war on their backyard, then why should the United States get involved over it? If it's not important enough for the Europeans to take the lead on it, much less to be involved with it, then it shouldn't be in our either. But Clinton had this idea he wanted to be the indispensable nation. And then, of course, concurrent in this, in the same time frame, he was also the big pusher of NATO. He wanted to expand NATO. And that brings me to the first of the things I want to talk about here about how pernicious this idea of being the indispensable nation is, and being forward thinking. I'm not forward thinking. Sorry, wrong word I was looking for. To be saying, hey, we want to be a non-isolationist country. We need to be a positive influence out there. It's not just a bad idea. It's a catastrophic and potentially self-defeating idea. Let me show you how. Again, these are facts I'm sharing with you here, not just my opinion. These are facts. Facts which the likes of McConnell don't ever talk about, and you don't see it mention a word in that whole huge, it's like 5,000 word article in the magazine, the Foreign Affairs magazine. We have been moving since, let's say, the NATO situation. So Clinton wanted to expand NATO. NATO was formed in 1949 when there was a very real and legitimate threat in the Soviet Union, and then subsequently the Warsaw Pact, and analogous to NATO, was formed. And you had two of these blocks that split east and west apart. And at any time, they had the military capacity, they had the manpower, and possibly even the will to attack the West, both conventionally and nuclear. The only way we could prevent that from happening was to have an equally large force. And we did. We had a huge number. I forget the number at the time, a couple of million, I think, were on active duty in as late as the 1980s. And we needed to do that. So it was NATO made a lot of sense. It kept us safe, and it kept the peace for decades. And it truly did. It's not a hyperbole. It's a legitimate accomplishment that NATO did keep the peace for a long time in there. The NATO conventional and nuclear umbrella, all of that was very good, as long as we had an enemy. But when that enemy fell apart and disintegrated, when the USSR dissolved, when the Warsaw Pact ceased to exist, then so did the requirement for NATO. Now, imagine this. Imagine if instead of expanding NATO, we brought it to a successful close. And we said the greatest military alliance in the history of the world had accomplished its mission. The other side was defeated politically. They never had to fight. Yay, let's have a big victory party, parades everywhere, confetti, terrific, yay. Now each nation can go back to providing its own national security because there is no longer this big existential threat that faces anyone. That what was your adversary is now crumbled. Its economy had just absolutely collapsed. It would be decades before it recovered any kind of strength at all. And now they're fragmented, so they're not together anymore. Now there's all these independent nations. So there's no need for NATO at this point. We could have absolutely patted ourselves on the back for a long time and then ended that. And now, instead of spending all this money on national defense, they could have spent it on other things. We could have spent it on other things. We could have been saying, hey, diplomatically, we're going to reach out to these adversaries here. Russia doesn't need to be our adversary. Russia has existed for centuries. It's going to exist for centuries, God willing, as long as nuclear war doesn't ruin anything. But short of that, there's every expectation that it's going to continue to exist well into the future, like it has well into the past. So we have to cooperate. All these nations do, all these peoples, we have to cooperate and learn to get together. They were weak, and it was a perfect opportunity to say, hey, let's strengthen our economic interests, our cultural connections, etc. How much more beneficial would that have been for the Western world, for the world at large, if we had taken that path then? From a position of absolute strength, we said, hey, we are going to embark in this new direction here of cooperation, and we're going to lower the military threat, the representation even of it, to the Soviets, or to the Russians, rather. Now, no one was going to say, you still had national defense, as we did. And at any time, if the conditions change, we can reform a NATO, reform any kind of alliance. We can always do that. So it's not disarming. It wasn't dismantling. It wasn't trusting anyone. It was like saying, we're just recognizing reality here. And by doing that, we take away any possibility that the Russians have to say, hey, we're recognizing the threat, so we're going to build up, a la the Chinese. If we had not done those things either, then we would have taken away much of the motivation and reasons for them taking these actions that they have claimed, if we just haven't taken the provocative actions. Now then, Russia may be a friend to the West today. Almost certainly Ukraine would still be whole, to include Crimea to this day. That's been the cost of making sure NATO continues to advance and claiming that it was for national defense. It never was, because there was no enemy. It's not that hard to figure out. But see, the tops of Mitch McConnell and the top people who profit off war don't want you to have it. In fact, they undercut that, and they claim the opposite all the time. They say, no, we needed to advance. It was a defensive alliance. We were defensive. Only in your mind, but I assure you, to the other side of that line, it was anything but. And Putin had been saying from the beginning that this is a problem. Actually, Yeltsin, even before Putin, has said this is a problem. William Burns, when he was an ambassador, said at the time, it's a problem. In the 90s, the same guy who's the CIA director today, before said, don't go forward with NATO. It's going to have this negative reaction. It was self-evident at the time. I worked for U.S. Senator Kay Bailey Hutchison in the 90s, and I was adamantly opposed for these very reasons. It wasn't hard to figure out. It wasn't hard to figure out where we're going. This is the wreckage that we have because of that decision, because we didn't even try to have a peaceful relations with all of Europe and all the neighbors and have one whole Europe. We didn't even try. We just stayed with the military first. And now then we had this catastrophic results so far just in Ukraine. But if we keep being stupid, it could spread out beyond that. Then you have, then let's look at some of the other issues we have here. Iraq. We all know that weapons of mass destruction claim for the war was always a ruse, but we didn't care. We went ahead and did it anyway. Even when we realized that it was wrong, instead of recognizing our mistake and saying, all right, we're going to withdraw our forces. We should never have attacked here, but we'll help Iraq however it can. But you guys are going to have to figure this out. You're going to have to deal with the wreckage. That's what we should have done. Yeah, that would have minimized a terrible situation. Instead, we stayed there. And of course, then we had the predictable rise of an insurgency, because when you have an occupying power in a country that doesn't want you there, what do you think is going to happen? That they're going to suddenly just, dip their shoulders and say, sure, whatever you tell us, America will do it. That's fantasy. It was always fantasy, and it was proven to be fantasy. But we tried to stay it anyway. And then we wanted to fix it with more power, etc. And what was the net result of that? Besides likely hundreds of thousands of Iraqi people who were killed, millions more fled, millions more were displaced internally. We took what was the Saddam Hussein country, which was a direct contradiction or a bulwark against the Iranians, because there was the secular government versus the Iranian government, which was a Shia. They were bulwark against each other. Now then we take Saddam out of the picture, and all of a sudden, now then there's Iranian militia is part of the Iraqi security forces. And now then they're almost as subservient to Iran. So you took what was a bulwark against Iran, and now then you made it hand in glove. Congratulations, Bush. Well done. All you neocons who love that kind of stuff and clap about it all the time. Terrific, John Bolton. Tops like that. That's what we get. Bolton keeps calling for this stuff, and he keeps being oblivious to the damage that his ideas caused, that Mitch McConnell's ideas are causing now. And then, of course, I don't need to go into too much more on Afghanistan. An absolute disaster. Should never have happened. If the most you can say that by the summer of 2002, we had accomplished our military task, which was to punish the Taliban, we should have left and allowed the Afghans to figure out whatever they were going to do. There was no military force left. The Taliban had been utterly destroyed, and as an organization, it ceased to exist. So we didn't need to keep any more military force there. You could have had diplomatic force, you could have had humanitarian efforts, etc., and then let the Afghans figure it out for themselves. But we didn't want to do that. We needed to use military first, because that's what these promises, that's what they live for. That's what these liberal interventionists live for. They think we can fix all this stuff. There was an article out last week, in fact, where they're looking now the same thing in Syria. Yes, let's fix this. Let's fix Syria. We can't stay out of that. Are you stupid? Are you stupid or blind? Because it's one of those two. There's not any other rational alternatives, because you have all of this wreckage in the past there. And I can add Libya too, where Obama took out Muammar Gaddafi. And then that country descended into civil war. And to this day, there are still competing governments there. So we did not benefit the people of Libya. We didn't benefit anyone except arms makers, I suppose. And then in the Middle East, we still have 900 troops in Syria, even though it's descended into chaos. We still have 2,500 troops in Iraq, even though they don't want us there, because we don't care what they want. We care what we want. And all it does is put our troops at risk, where some have been killed, scores more have been wounded, in no service to America except for the primicists, the people like McConnell. They just understand this, folks, black and white. They are causing harm to America. All of these missions do. Unless someone has a direct threat to the United States, then we don't need to use military power. Even if we don't get things the way they want, things work out diplomatically or politically or economically different than we want, that's fine, because all those things can be managed over time. But when you get into it where you're forcing or attempting to force, all you do is cause catastrophe for our people. How many American troops paid the ultimate sacrifice for the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq? Thousands upon thousands of them. I think over 6,000 in the two combined. Hundreds of thousands suffered post-traumatic stress and traumatic brain injuries. I think 50-something thousand received wounds at various times. Those two wars together cost us about $6 trillion. And much of that price will be paid over the years because of the requirements to take care of our troops over time. All because of the primicists. Wars that should never have been fought or should have been shut down within months. That's what they're buying for you, folks. They say that we need to spend trillions more, that we need to significantly expand the military. All they're doing is creating future cost to America. And this is assuming that we can continue with our economic deal where we can just print money whenever we need to, and that there's not a catastrophe because of it. That's definitely an aberration. It's gone on for a long time, and some people think it'll go on forever. It won't. There will come a day when we have an economic crisis and calamity, and suddenly we won't be able to print money. And you have the likes of China and Russia with BRICS that are actively trying to pursue that objective, to where the primacy of the dollar will lose its monarchy, basically, as the global currency that can just allow us to do whatever we want. That day will come to an end. And if we don't figure that out ahead of time and get our house in order first, then it'll be calamity here. And of course, there's always the risk, like the one in Russia, Ukraine, where we could get drawn into a war. We should never face. We should never fight any war over there. We should never fight China over Taiwan, ever, ever. And to those people who say, yeah, but the chips, economics, that's an issue. That could be an issue. If China does ever move on Taiwan, that would be a significant issue. It will also crush their own economy. And so that's going to put a big check on what they may or may not want to do. But we should not facilitate that by adding to the harm it would do to us by getting in a war we can't win. We don't have an Air Force, Navy, and Army that's significantly big enough or has the capacity to defeat China on their front yard. Even if you ever, in the initial phase, stop China from invading on Taiwan, now then you've hammered us and nailed us to the ground in there to where we have this perpetual requirement to defend Taiwan across the straits. And I assure you, with everything in me, that the Chinese will never, under any circumstances, even if they suffered a defeat in an attempt to invade Taiwan, give up and allow a U.S. military installation on their border, 100 miles across the water. So all we would be doing is guaranteeing future war until finally it probably goes nuclear, if it didn't in the initial phase. So you see, there is no rational path that any time military force is going to work, so stop it. Whatever, if you tell Taiwan we are not going to defend you, that changes their political calculus. Now then they know they have to get along with their much bigger partner, and they're not going to make dumb decisions. They may make decisions they don't like, but they'll be able to make them and be able to accommodate. And even if you don't like any of those outcomes, it's not our affair. It's their affair, and they've got to navigate. Because here's the key thing. Here's the key thing. And this is true in all these cases. It doesn't matter what you want as an American. It doesn't matter what I want as an American. It matters what they want over there. And we don't even have the capacity militarily or intellectually to fix Syria, to fix the China-Taiwan issue, to fix the Russia-Ukraine issue. Those folks have to figure it out, and they will. And whether they come to an issue we like or an outcome we like or don't like, it'll get solved. You trying to do what Mitch McConnell suggested at a what was the phrase he used? The $900 billion is not near enough. He's going to take more money out of your pocket, have less money if we can do anything productive for our own country, add to our national debt, and increase the chance that we continue to suffer loss elsewhere. That is what you are buying when you listen to Mitch McConnell and the promises. So don't fall for the lie that anything besides like elevating diplomacy or just letting countries actually manage their own affairs is any kind of neo-isolation. There's no truth to that, because I am for a significant international engagement diplomatically. So we should absolutely, it's commensurate with our power and with our position in the world, that we should be involved all over the place. We should help where we can. We should help with the facility. What's the word I'm looking for? With humanitarian supplies, if that happens there. We should provide diplomatic help to anybody who wants it, to try and help them come to an agreement. If our objective is a win-win, and we're looking for ways to solve problems at the lowest possible cost, at the best benefit for all the different parties, where each side comes out with something they win, we'll find ourselves welcome in a lot more places in the world. We'll find ourselves with a lot less stress and a lot less risk of getting into wars. That is the lowest cost and the best chance to achieve positive outcomes for America. You listen to Mitch McConnell and the promises, and we are going to get ourselves one day into a war we can't win, and the cost will be more than we can ever afford. That is the truth. And I'm not even talking nuclear weapons. That's a whole different category of catastrophe. But even if it stays in a conventional issue, we have enormous financial and military risk if we listen to those folks. Don't do it. I've armed you with the truth right now, so don't listen to any of these lies anymore, and be able to penetrate through the shaft of their deception when they're claiming all these other things, by keeping in mind the track record of the vast wreckage that they have caused on their watch using their means. Thank you very much. That's your deep dive for today. We will look forward to seeing you tomorrow.